Hello and welcome to Property Question Time. This is your show where our experts do their best to try and answer your property related questions. So I'm Stephen Galpin, and joining me today are our experts, John Howard, property developer, investor, author and mentor. Welcome, John.
Thank you very much.
And James Hadley, founder of Property from Pensions, pension tax specialist. Welcome to you.
Thank you, Stephen.
Good. Nice to see you both. John, you're going first.
Yes.
What effect will the government's levelling up policy have on house prices nationwide? For example, will house prices in the north rise and those in the south fall, or will the macro markets emerge dependent on the level of investment in any one particular area?
Goodness me, who on earth has written or emailed that in? That's a serious question.
It is
isn't
indeed.
We could be all day here doing that one.
It's addressed to a serious commentator.
Well, thank you very much. It's kind, challenging but kind. So, the levelling up. Everyone's been banging on about levelling up. And of course, if the government is serious about getting back in the next 2 years' time, which I think is going to be a huge challenge to them, they need to sort this levelling up out as best they can. It's a great tagline, isn't it? Levelling up. What does it really mean? It means investing in the north of the country, Midlands and the north of the country, in order to balance up perhaps the housing, the cost of housing in terms of purchase price of housing and so on. Now, that's very, very difficult to do because London is always going to be 6 times more expensive than any other part of the UK, apart from small pockets. And you spoke about small pockets a minute ago. You know, it is a micro market. So there's some very expensive parts in Manchester. The rest of Manchester is relatively modest. There's some very expensive parts in the northeast and everywhere else as well. So this levelling up is a difficult thing to really, I think, prove and understand. Now, HS2 was all about levelling up. But of course, it's stopping at Birmingham. Where it really needs to go is to Liverpool, Leeds, Manchester, and it's not doing so.
And across.
And across, absolutely. Across the country is much more important in a way. But they have got a town fund of 25 million, which they've given to 107 towns, not cities, towns across the UK. Now, you'll be surprised to know that about 100 of those are held by Tory Conservative MPs. What a surprise. Why have they done that? To support them, trying to get them back in, re-elected in the next when they're, next parliament. So that's why they've done that. It's cynical, but that's why they've done it. But 25 million in 107 towns is impressive. They're not all up north. Some of them are down south as well. But what that can do to a small town is really, if you want to invest in that town and you know where the government are investing, you can bowl in on the back of it, and actually.
John, you say 25 million pounds is impressive. There's people pay more than that for houses down here.
Well, I think you're being rather arrogant and rude there, actually, to people who live up north, Stephen. Yeah, because actually, there's a lot of people up north who've got a very nice home for £100,000, £200,000.
Yeah, but John,
it's not all about London, as I keep telling you.
I know what you're saying, John.
Yeah.
But this levelling up is just a pipe dream, because I tell you what, go and ask some of the employers if they'd like their wage bills sort of levelling up with London up in the north.
Well, it's obviously cheaper to live up north.
So therefore, it's not going to be level, is it?
No, but it's not just talking about, it's about deprivation. It's not about people's wages who have got good jobs. It's about, and that's a typical comment for someone who lives in London, to be honest with you.
No, it's not, because
I think it is.
If you go back in history, for instance, when the mills were at their height, there was real wealth in the north of England, but it went.
There's some very wealthy people and successful people in the north of England. They don't all live in London. So, but also, and another example of that would be the free ports, which was announced the other day. There's a number of free ports in the northeast and Liverpool, and they've just announced Felixstowe and Harwich as well in the south. But these free ports, the whole point of a government is not to just plough money into an area and no one else support it. Their job in levelling up is to commit and give confidence to an area so that other people come in and invest in that area also. And that's what will happen. It won't happen quick enough for them, I don't think. to win the next
John,
election.
£25 million is going to do nothing.
No, it doesn't even scratch the surface, does it?
They're spending 100 million in Blackpool alone. 100 million in Blackpool. So the town fund was just an example of 107 towns who have managed to get the money.
Blackpool probably needs it.
Well, it might need it. But what I'm saying is,
John,
there's a lot of money being spent. A lot of money, and,
John,
and the town fund is just an example of that.
John, just look out of the window here. This block of apartments you
Ghastly,
see here.
yeah.
You might say it's ghastly,
Yeah.
but that's £500 million worth of apartments in one block. What do you think £25 million is going to do to a town?
Quite a lot to a small town, because that's the start. Other people then, like myself, other investors then get involved because the government have committed money into that town. It's not just about London. London is like a country all on its own, really. So the rest of the country is very, very important.
To a point, you're right. Yeah. James, what do you think?
I agree to a point that London is almost like its own country in a way. But the Freeports thing was interesting because I'm probably not as up to date with that as you, but I can see how if there were higher levels of investment into that, how jobs would follow, and then that would achieve the levelling up agenda. But just going back to your point, if the spending is to almost try to win the next election, I think it's too little too late.
Well, of course it is, because partly that, because...
But then what about any sort of reversal in policy in a couple of years' time? So then it becomes sort of nugatory.
Well, they won't. They've committed. They're not going to then take. A lot of the towns have actually had the money, so they're not going to. They're not going to say, "I want it back."
But John, I think the essence of the question is to ask whether it's going to pull London down or the south down and push the north up, or whether it'll go the other way.
I think things will stay fairly even Stevens in that respect. I don't, because London is so strong. It's one of the best capital cities in the world. It's got an awful lot going for it, apart from the mayor. So, I don't think London is going to suddenly be a problem. It's going to be 6 times more
and the fact
expensive.
Here, according to you. No.
It's going to be 6 times more expensive on average than the rest of the country still. Yeah. But it doesn't mean you can't improve the rest of the country.
No, listen.
And the standard, people's standard of living, the health, lots of things go into it.
People's standard of living has to come from work-derived income, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, in the most part, yeah.
And, I'd agree, a Freeport will create a lot of employment or whatever, but I mean, that's 3 or 4 across the British Isles, isn't it?
There's 10 Freeports, I think, across the UK, including Scotland as well.
Yeah, roughly. I think they've just been announced, haven't they?
Yes,
Okay, so, James, your question. It's potentially 10 years before I reach retirement age. Could the panel suggest any safe investment programs that I could enter into involving property other than buy-to-let?
Well, there's a banana skin, I think, in that question, and you just threw in the word safe, and that could send it in all sorts of different directions. And you've got to get a definition of safe, which is going to be different to every single person. Is it safety that you're going to get a secure income for a number of years, perhaps for life or beyond that? Or is it that you're going to get some certainty of capital growth?
Shall we say limited volatility?
Oh, limited volatility. I love the word volatility, because if you look at, let's say, so property can be quite lumpy assets, and therefore generally most investors might only own a handful if they're lucky. And so their wealth and their income is going to be tied to those assets. Well, if you look at the likes of Elon Musk, let's say, he's very concentrated in his wealth, with the majority of it being in Tesla. And he got I think he's got a Guinness World Record for having the most volatile wealth in the world. And so by going into property, unless you've got a sufficient amount of money to start with, you could be exposing yourself to similar levels of volatility. You get a commercial property, you get a good tenant, or you get a poor tenant, or what's going on around you. Yeah, exactly. So you've got the problems with the high street. So the definition of safe, and to answer that question, is like it's a difficult one to answer. But I think if you're looking for, if people are looking for, let's say, certainty of income, because I think most people, when they're looking at property, it's the income stream they're looking at first. Well, first and foremost, I'd say, well, really, if you're that interested in income, why have property when you could have an annuity, perhaps, that's just got a certainty of an income stream for the rest of your life or beyond? But if you want to get into property and in a relatively safe way, I think, you've got real estate investment trusts. You look at the FTSE 100, there are a handful of them in there. They're big, they're liquid, they're multi-billion-pound funds managed by professionals. And for people, unless they're expert fund managers, they're probably a good first place to start to look.
And would that be relatively easy for a private individual to access? You'd just do it through a broker, would you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there are numerous low-cost platforms out there that will charge modest dealing fees and hold the assets for people in a variety of wrappers, whether that's ISAs or pensions and so on and so forth.
And if you were to buy into a REIT, let's say you put 10, 20, 30, 40, 50,000 in today, when would you start to receive a return on that?
Okay, well, I mean,
Does it have to be a year?
Well, it could be technically today, because if you've got a listed REIT, it's daily traded on the stock market. So if the value goes up or down, that's reflected in your portfolio in real time. But then you've got dividend yields, which, they could be paid out half yearly. And so, you could start getting a return technically from day one,
right,
depending on how well you choose.
Quite a modest return though, would you say, or not?
Well, yeah, I think the thing that, I suppose the disadvantage of taking that sort of strategy of investing into listed real estate investment funds is that you're not getting the same advantage or multiplication using leverage in the way that people do with buy-to-let mortgages. And so even though that can work against you, it can also hold you back in a rising market.
But in context of the question, I mean, as you rightly identified, it's being run by experts, and being a traded stock, it's going to have a lot of scrutiny, isn't it?
Of course, but those experts cost money because, of course, the cost of paying them comes off the top line and the investor gets the bottom.
Okay, on that note, that's all we've got time for in this half of the show. So join me again after the break and we'll be asking John and James more of your questions. Hello and welcome back to part 2 of Property Question Time. I'm Stephen Galpin and I'm joined by James Hadley and John Howard. John, your second question.
Yes.
Is the conversion of an attached garage to a living area allowed, conversion into a living area allowed under current permitted development rights for a private detached house?
Am I now a planning consultant or something?
Well, let's hope so.
Well, it's interesting. This has obviously come from someone who doesn't want to pay for a planning consultant's advice.
I think you're probably right.
So,
well,
we're willing to help if we can, but I'm no planning consultant, as you know. However, it does not come under PD. No, everyone's obsessed with PD. Everything you can do, everything with PD. And if you talk to these estate agents and everyone when they're selling something, oh, it's all right, it's PD, PD. No, it isn't. So if you've got a garage that is attached to your house and you want to put a window in it and get rid of the up and over door and put a window in it, you need planning permission.
Okay. And building regulation.
And building regulation. Now, if you want to get around it, which is probably what the question really is, yeah. What you could do, and what I've seen a few times, is for people to leave the garage door in place. Yep. Block up behind it.
Just do it.
And then have a window facing your garden, and no one, I mean, I'm not one to suggest this, of course, and I would never do it. However, that would be potentially an idea if you didn't want to, but you still really need building regs. And you're more likely to get building regs and planning, because you may not get planning, of course, because on these modern estates, sometimes the planning permission is written in such a way that to protect everyone else on the estate. So they may not let you not use your garage for a car because it means there'll be more cars on the road and so on. So it isn't as straightforward, as simple as people make out. The joke is, of course, that you can add 25% floor space onto your house now without planning permission, technically, but you need building regs, normally on the rear of the building. So it's a bit of a silly situation, but that's where we are.
John, from a number of the experts that we've had on over the last year or so, they've all been a bit sceptical about these permitted development rights. They say a lot of councils resist one way or another. Yes. I mean, what's the overall situation?
Well, my experience of PD, and we've done some very successful PD schemes, mainly early on in 2013, 14, 15, 16 really, where, the councils really didn't understand it very well. Commercial agents weren't pricing it into the deal. So you could buy a commercial property and the agents hadn't priced in the fact that it could be PD. And last year, the rules changed quite dramatically to include more things within the PD Act, Permissive Development Act, but also they gave the councils more strength in actually turning applications down.
Right.
In terms of light, parking, and all sorts of different things. So it's not as easy as it was. And the whole point of permissive development originally was that the government were just sick to death of local authorities not getting on and allowing commercial properties to become residential. So they said, we've had enough. All you've got to do now is this. And that's really how it is. You know, they had 56 days to tell you could do it and all the rest of it.
I presume that resistance against changing commercial to residential is because the rating income's less, isn't it?
Absolutely. If you
is
know
that
these
the
local
simple fact of it?
These local authorities, they don't start off by saying, "How can we help you?"
No.
They start off by saying, "Ooh, hang on a minute."
The answer is no. Now what's the question?
Exactly, and that's the problem. And it's a really poor attitude. On occasions, they are right. That's the problem, because if you're trying to convert a PD scheme to residential in a very commercial area, just because you perhaps can do it doesn't mean you should, because you can't fund. You may not be able to fund it. You may not be able to sell them at the end, or no one might rent them because it's such a rough commercial area. So you do have to be careful where you do these schemes.
But quite simply, when somebody wants to do something under permitted development rights, does it still have to go to the council?
Yes, absolutely.
Right. And when it goes to the council, does it go to the planning officers for a decision, or does it go to the planning committee for a decision?
It goes to the planning officers, and they have 56 days in which to say yes or no. You can go to appeal on a permissive development scheme. You can go to appeal on it. The whole point of though is it speeds everything up. The early PD schemes, a lot of them you can't miss them because they still look like officers, to be honest with you. So you didn't have to change any of the external, and you didn't pay any social housing levy at all either.
No 106 agreement.
No 106, no nothing. So, and I think, some of them, a lot of architects have got the hump about it, as well as planning officers, because they say they nickname them the slums of the future, because they were poorly converted in not good areas with no external changes, and some of them do look poor. Ours, of course, look very nice.
And the other thing is, just socially, a lot of these office or commercial buildings that have been converted don't have any sort of social infrastructure around them, do they? No shops.
No, you didn't need to prove any of those things. But interesting with pensions, of course, you've now got all these big American funds and so on. Would they look at a large, say, 100 block investment, which was a PD scheme, or would they prefer new build? I mean, how would a new build block?
I'd imagine that they'd get to the point that if I put my investor hat on rather than an advisor, I always worry about the exit. I imagine that these people would think to themselves, okay, that might stack up on a rental basis, but what about if we ever wanted to get out of it? You've raised the topic before of having the curtains at the office window, and it's not a good look. Yeah. And so the secondary sales and further on, that could be a big issue.
That's a very good point. And I think anyone looking to buy an investment, which is a PD scheme, in terms of buying 3 or 4 flats in it, I think you've got to consider, how can I sell these in 5 or 10 years? And people said, well, I don't want to sell them. Well, you might do. Anything could happen. You could get divorced and need to sell them.
But I mean,
don't want to be,
Interestingly enough, you're going to say again, I'm too London-centric, but I'm just thinking
Probably.
of one example, which is towards the end of Baker Street, which is really West End.
Yes.
Fine, it still looks like an office block that's been converted. But of course, people say, yeah, but look where it is.
Yeah, fantastic location.
I'd never find a bit of land to build anything like this in the West End. So it does have its advantages from that point of view. But I think you do need to be careful, don't you, if you're going to buy one as a sort of resident, you've got to be thinking about the resale, because it could be.
Well, a lot of the lending institutions, some of the building societies are very nervous about PD even now. Some of them have been up 6, 7, 8 years, looking very tired, not in great areas, especially the big schemes where they've got like 100 flats in them.
And where you're funding them, I mean, very few comparables to really base it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, there's not enough history yet of turnover of them to make valid comparison.
Good point.
Okay, James, I understand that residential property cannot be used to form a pension plan. However, It seems to me that a buy-to-let portfolio could provide a de facto pension from its income. Can the panel advise as to any disadvantages with these thoughts?
Okay, I mean, I think when people talk about pensions or portfolios, you've got to think about the purpose, and most people are looking at them for securing their future. And in reality, people don't want a buy-to-let portfolio, or they don't really want a pension. What they want is they want an old age that's comfortable and full of choices in reality. So it's actually working it back to the mechanism to get there. And so it's a common question that we get, that people say, oh, you know, should I have property or should I have a pension? Well, just to draw the distinction, a pension is, or pensions are, a set of tax rules governing on how assets are taxed on when they go in, how they're held, and when they're taken out. Whereas real estate is an asset class in its own right, and pension schemes hold assets. So in reality, you can combine the two. So if people are leaning more towards buy-to-let, why wouldn't you wrap it in a tax-efficient wrapper? Pension scheme's probably the most advantageous tax regime we've got in the UK. You can get tax relief on the contributions to buy it.
Yeah.
So you've got government helping you to get it. You can hold the properties and not receive income tax on the rents received. If you need to rebalance the portfolio, you're not facing capital gains tax. And the whole thing was never in your estate for inheritance tax purposes to start with. So that's not a problem at a later date. So I think actually really the ultimate answer is combining the two.
Yeah.
But I would say that.
I think there's another factor there, James, just looking at it from totally the outside. A buy-to-let portfolio can be quite hard work.
Agreed.
Right? Or laying it off to somebody else to deal with can be quite expensive. And you've got to think whether you might well cope with that work well at 50, you might not cope well with it at 80.
Well, the interesting thing though is I kind of see it in reverse really, that at 50, you've probably got a lot on your plate. Typically people might still have family, both younger and older to deal with, career, business, all the rest of it. I know that 80 is perceived to be old historically, but you know, my generation, I guess, are likely to live to about 100 as some of the
look at Stephen.
Well, exactly. Yeah.
I'm at 102 now.
Methuselah.
103.
No. Don't add it on work.
So, but I mean, so there is an argument to say, yeah, okay, 80 is knocking on a little bit. I look at my parents approaching that themselves, but given how much responsibility you might not have in the day at that point, it might still be doable. So, alternative view.
Okay, well, there we are. That's all we've got time for today. So a big thank you to John Howard and James Hadley. Thank you both very much indeed for coming in. I'm Stephen Galpin. Join me again next time on Property Question Time.